Let's do a bit of foregrounding, okay? And maybe begin with how you look at your identity, where you were born, raised, and also, like all your campus experiences, school, college, and what brought you to journalism actually? Yeah.
I got into journalism because I would say that journalism worked for me because I truly enjoyed the opportunity to learn about people, but also have an opportunity to, many of us journalists may have this, you want to save the world. You want to save the world. You want to be the voice for the voiceless, or whatever it is that we say to ourselves. And now I've started rethinking that idea of the voiceless. To me, no one doesn't have a voice. It's just that other people are not hearing. That's the way I
You actually thought of voicing this whole race relations that will play, at the newsroom, and somewhere I read that you actually were very vocal about talking, working with white directors and all that. If you could just take me through that, that would be very interesting.
So I worked at CBC for about 15 years, and while I was working there, I worked in a number of positions. I was a host, I was a producer, I used to write as a producer. I also I did a number of things. I can't remember everything now. But the point is that in the course of my work, there were moments where I could tell that people were not interested in having me around, or that they were not interested in my perspective, or that they saw me to have a very narrow place in the world. And I found that to be unfair. Sometimes people would say things to me that were, I would use the words out of pocket, but just rude. And other times they would underestimate me, or underestimate what I was able to do. And I found that to be very unfair. So I'll give you a couple of examples. In one instance, so I'm a person who likes to wear very bright colors. I'm from Ghana, that's what we do, we like patterns. I'm sure you know something about wearing bright colors. So I walked into the office at one time, and my executive producer, she said, "That's a really nice dress. Where did you get that? Did you get it from Jamaica, man?" And so to me, I was actually really confused. To her, I think she was just being funny, that maybe this dress was from Jamaica and she wanted to put on this accent. But I get that kind of stuff a lot, where someone assumes where you're from, and then they kind of just make jokes about it. When you do this kind of thing, it makes someone feel like they don't belong where they are. It might be a joke to you, but if that's a person who's been getting these jokes all the time, it becomes more than just a prick. Now it's a cut, and now it's a gash, right? So the way I see it is that after some time, I realized that what I was doing was pretending like that wasn't happening. I was pretending like
Did you want to, at some point, also want to belong?
Yeah, I did. And so it led me to realize that when people were saying these kinds of things, that I found that now when I saw other people of color at work, I would get close to them and I would say, "Are you okay? Are you getting paid as much as you feel you should? Are you being treated properly?" And then we started an employee resource group, an affinity group for employees of color at CBC, and I put my hand up to be a founder, and I was a co-chair. And in the process of doing that, we ended up having to have a lot of conversations with management about the racist reports that we would put out, and also racist treatment within CBC.
What actually led to that issue? Did you all raise that issue and that got the management to bring in, or on their own?
Yeah, there were a few people who were more senior than me who had already been experiencing a number of things, and most of them that were black. And they were talking about things that had been happening at CBC, and they wanted to come together and say something. They wanted to they wanted to come together. But we were given the idea that we should form a formal group, an ERG. And then we did that for some time. But I would say that I spoke up the most after George Floyd was murdered. That's when I spoke up the most.
I want to ask you a little bit about, the research that you did. Okay, what did it show up? Because where is some of the experiences that you actually, when people shared with you, and were they eyebrow raising?
The research, so the research that I was doing at Massey College, this is essentially me doing a number of interviews with leaders of color, so racialized leaders of color. And the reason why I was doing that was because I was considering becoming a leader, and I didn't see anyone who looked like me, so I was actually very concerned about whether or not people would even listen to me if I became a leader. I was very concerned about how much influence I could really have. And so what I found from these leaders is that they found it very, some of them found it very stressful to advocate for other racialized people who are under them. And in some instances it was stressful for them because they want to support people, but they also know that maybe their peers or their superiors would think that they are offering special treatment. And so there's a line that they have to walk. But I still maintain that we need more leaders of color, or people of color, racialized people in these leadership positions.
Yeah, it's like, often when you raise such uncomfortable questions, when you talk about diversity, you talk about equity, you talk about inclusion, many tend to look at you as a troublemaker.
Yeah.
You're always coming with an agenda.
Yes.
So I just want to ask, how was the treatment, or how were you looked at by fellow journalists?
I think it really depends on how you present, to be honest with you. What the privilege that I had at CBC is that I was a host, and I was when you're a host, and I was also full time. So it's easier for me to raise my hand up. It's easier for me to say something because I didn't have that much fear that someone's going to fire me because I'm opening my mouth. There were other people that I feel I was kind of speaking for because they didn't have the same kind of privilege or standing. But I will say that there were some people I know of instances of some people who did speak up, and they were considered troublemakers. The thing about raising your voice sometimes, at least at CBC, is that you don't always know if somebody thinks that you're a troublemaker. They may not tell you. What might happen is that if you go up for another job, you may not get it, right? It's some of it is invisible. It's not direct.
Organization of media, which is happening globally, and so the death of the trade unions and all of that. So your voice is actually, anyway muffled. So you can very easily be kicked out of the industry altogether. If you're looked at that way.
Yeah, I have to tell you. So we were talking about. I kind of mentioned George Floyd before. After George Floyd was murdered, the CBC's senior executive team asked me with 16 Black people at work. They wanted to hear from them. And after we had that conversation, I remember thinking, because I was one of the 16 Black people, I remember thinking, what are we going to do now? Okay, you've heard us. What is actually going to happen now? I wasn't confident that anything would be done. And so I called those 16 people, I called all of us together, and I said, what are we going to do? And eventually, we came up with a 10-point call to action that we then delivered to the senior executive team, and it was publicized. And what I'll say about having done that is that I was very scared to click go. I was very scared to send the email to the president and to send it out on Twitter because I was afraid that I would mark myself as a troublemaker and that they wouldn't, that senior folks wouldn't talk to me, or that I would not be considered for another job. I just thought that I'm supposed to be silent about this. That is where my anger comes from. Is feeling like I'm not supposed to talk about this. But there are companies, there are media houses that say that they want to represent Canada. You cannot do that if you're not going to address the negative things that are happening in your house. You cannot. And what that means is that you absolutely have to listen to the ones that you think are troublemakers. You have to listen to them. The troublemakers are the ones who are taking a risk. They're taking risks.
What we see generally, it's a global trend. It's happening in India too. You know, when you want to correct a wrong. Okay, so in the process when you send out to say, you put out an ad for hiring, you always, it's often we see in India also where women are encouraged to apply, or we have the caste issue is big here, so Dalit candidates are encouraged to apply. So that is happening worldwide. We see that, you know, women of color are encouraged to apply to this post. So is that catalyst enough for a change, or do you think that we need to have more structural changes, you know, which will actually can bring in something to the ground?
It's not enough. There are 4 things that I think we have to do. One is that we do have to have mentors like this, where you are explicit in inviting people of color or folks from marginalized communities to your media outlet. That's one. The next thing you have to do is that you absolutely have to take measures to retain them. It is not enough to say, we've hired them. It's not enough. Because what happens often is that they are hired, and they're hired at lower positions. The Canadian Association of Journalists did do a survey, we spoke about it earlier, and what they found in the survey is that most of the diversity is at the lower levels, right? And so these are folks who are part-time, they're doing they're interns. And so we have to do more than just bring them in. So you are inviting them, and you are creating programs to retain them. Then you have to have the leadership. Make sure that you promote folks up to these positions. At a place like CBC, it is one of those institutions where a person is in a job for a very, very long time. For a very, very long time. It's very easy for a person to be in a certain job for a long time. They might be in a specific, we call them steps and bands, you know. So a person, you don't just kick a person out. A person, if they want to stay there, they get to stay there. So what we have to do is we have to have these programs. At CBC they have a wonderful program called the Developing Emerging Leaders Program. You have to promote people into leadership. So you are inviting them to come. You are putting in programs to retain them. You are putting folks in leadership positions, and you have to count. You have to count who is there. And you have to be open to accounting who is there all the time. The CAJ, last year, when the first time that they did their survey, I think they got to about 3,000 journalists. Then it moved up to about 5,000 journalists that had been counted. We have to keep doing this, and we have to count. The numbers will be bad. We have to understand, the numbers will be bad. One of the reasons why some people don't want to participate is because they're afraid the numbers will be bad. But if we just get it out of the way, the numbers are going to be bad, it's fine. But we have to count so that we know. And then continue.
Caste representation, region representation. I can say for myself, you know, I come from the Northeast India, where we hardly have people in the Indian newsrooms. You know, I think I'm the only woman who is the chief of bureau in an organization which is Delhi-based. And maybe I've broken some glass ceiling somewhere. So, and this is 2023. And I remember when I joined the United News of India, which is a well-known news agency, in the 90s, I was the first woman from the region to be hired at the New Delhi headquarters. And earlier in the day, I was telling you about my experience of meeting the first, hires, women hire at the Hindu. And where they were talking about these 2 women who were hired, but there were no women's restroom for them. So they didn't know what to do with them then, you know. So this is where we come from. So this is, we can actually identify so much, as you said. Okay, so one other thing I want to ask you is also you as a woman journalist, how do you see this whole Canadian media landscape? As a woman and also as a woman of color, you know, there's an intersectionality there. Are there say more leaders, women leaders, you know, in the newsroom, editors, you know?
I know that right now, according to that survey, it's pretty much at parity in terms of the numbers of women in the newsrooms that were part of the survey, and men. It's about 49% men and 50.6 women, and then you have 0.4 non-binary. And so what that means is that the women are there, but they are holding positions that are lower. So there are more women who are in part-time and internship positions than the men. And so what that says is, yes, things have moved up. And I would say, in my experience, I've had many women producers and leaders and superiors. So I've had that experience. What I'll say is that if you have experienced hardship and you have experienced a style of managing, and it's from men, it's very easy to also manage in that way. And that type of managing may also be against women. It's very possible to manage in that way. So I would say that the new type of leadership for women can be coming from understanding what you have gone through and knowing that you don't have to replicate the bad type of treatment that you got. That's one thing I'll say. As a woman of color now, there is that intersection of the type of treatment that I'm going to get. So I'm going to, some folks have been harassed, sexually harassed, and then some folks are thought to be the ones that have to take the notes in the meetings, right? The ones who have to organize the parties in the newsroom, the ones who have to clean the kitchen in the newsroom. Those are the kinds of things that happen. And also having to manage someone's advances. How do you manage someone's sexual advances when you are trying to just work? You just want money and you want to do, or you believe in the job. How do you manage that? Do you say nothing? Do you say something to your friend? Do you say something to that person? Either, whatever it is, you are thinking, will I have this job anymore? So I don't know if that's exclusive to being a woman or a woman of color, but I know that that's something that does happen to women. What I will say is that it is very concerning about how some women of color are being harassed online in Canada. There's many women of color, especially those who hold like TV positions or who have opinion columns, are harassed, highly harassed.
That's, I think, a global trend now.
It is a global trend. It is a global trend.
It's happening in India also. And, you know, I mean, like women particularly are also, the sexual aspect is very strong, yeah, so that we've seen in
where you stand in the world, what your privileges are, what you don't have in this world, and how you can see yourself as an expert of certain things, particularly if you are from a marginalized community, but also how you can support other people. If you are part of a dominant community, how can you support your fellow journalists? One way I'll say right now is that if you're in a newsroom and you're having a conversation, and I am there and I'm talking about something that's happening in the Black community, and I'm giving you an idea. If the editor says, I'm not sure that's a story, then your job in that moment is to say, well, wait, let's hear a little bit more. Because the one thing that I want editors and I want all newsroom leaders to understand is that if I am the only Black person in the room, who is the expert? I am the expert, right? So if I'm telling you that there's something happening in this community, why would you listen to me? Doesn't it make sense to listen? Aren't you journalists? Aren't you curious? The thing that you should do is say, tell me more. What is happening? It doesn't mean that you should call me biased. It means that you should ask me to tell you more. And if you have questions and you want me to be accurate, you want me to be rigorous, you want me to
have the facts, I can do that too. But recognize that I have something to offer to the conversation.
What is the change that we're going to see? What will emerge?
Well, one is the expertise and another is the awareness, right? So something that happened in Canada is the growth of stories around Indigenous people and Indigenous issues. At the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, a group called CBC Indigenous was formed. And what they did was they started to do, and it was populated by Indigenous people, Indigenous reporters. And what they did is they started to tell stories from their own communities. They started to tell stories about Indigenous people. What does that mean? That means that Canada gets to understand and know more about Indigenous people. One thing that one of my colleagues, an Indigenous journalist and educator, Duncan McHugh, he always says also that everyone should do these stories. It's not just Indigenous people who should do these stories. Everyone should do these stories.
It's interesting. So this also I would like to just weave it in that, you know, in our newsrooms also, it's very important that we have these marginalized voices, you know, who need to tell their own stories.
Yeah,
It's important that and many times I don't see that happening yet in newsrooms yet. You know, I mean, like you may actually want to tell those stories, but it should be through them. You know, so
yes, I think that what happens is that you also get nuance, right? So if there are only white people telling stories about black people, then you're going to get a certain perspective. You're going to get a certain
only one factor.
Right. You might get one line of story, and you might get only negative stories. But if you include black people, or if black people are given the latitude to tell these stories, you will find nuance. You will find joy. You will find so many aspects of these different communities, and that's what we want. Also, if you are an outlet that's looking for something new, that's where you can get something new. Is in these nuances that live within these communities.